What are you doing?
Collecting, milady. I only need 33 more fluff wisps from the tumbleweed sprite.
The battle is just over the next rise, and you're here collecting?
Of course, City Dweller. I must collect enough fluff wisps to free the Mirage Princess. It is a sacred and honored quest.
Your ride?
Oh, yes. The Toadkin are our brave allies, and Shadowfats carries me boundingly into battle.
Yeah, here's mine.
Whoa.
So, have fun with those poof balls.
Yeah.
Death of a Game, Global Agenda. Death of a Game is a series in which I, nerdSlayer, take a look at games over the past years that were either a death of a franchise or even a company. I then attempt to speak about the history of said game up until its ultimate demise. I want to show you guys the most objective experience I can, so I will refrain from wearing my nostalgia goggles. The criteria behind the game being dead would be A, it's actually dead, B, it had a sudden mass exodus of players and never recovered, C, the game never launched or the company dissolved. At the end of each of these videos, I hope you guys will have a better understanding of why and how the game in question failed. Perhaps knowing such can teach us a valuable lesson on the video game industry, or at least enough to keep us from throwing money at such games or companies in the future. Global Agenda. A niche game that can really tug on my heartstrings. It was close to a perfect balance of a shooter and MMO. Think Overwatch, with higher time to kills, more like an MMO, level progression, and a gear and experience system. Some thought that the gameplay was behind in times, but I thought in terms of its balance between what a shooter and MMO was, it was really ahead of its time. So the history for Global Agenda. Global Agenda, according to the company who created it, hi-rez, was a massively multiplayer action game set in the 22nd Earth, a spy-fi world of advanced technology and player-driven conflict. In the wake of a severe global disaster, the political face of the 22nd century Earth has changed and the player-created factions scheme against each other for power. Traditional full-scale wars are a thing of the past. Factions must rely on covert agencies, teams of elite special operatives able to seize and defend key facilities. The future of humanity is their battleground, where knowledge is power, technology is a race, and everyone has an agenda. Interesting to note, hi-rez was a company that was and is privately owned. Some joke that it's some millionaire's pet project, but not much is really known about how it came to be and how it was funded. Global Agenda came out in February 1st, 2010, though it had a paid beta the previous year. Paid beta being you could buy the game early and then would have full access to the beta. Some people liked this as they could play the game early in development while having a chance to support the developers who frankly were developing a rather unique game. Other people, including me looking back, actually thought that this would hurt the game, because after people bought the game and played it to death, they figured out that there really wasn't much content in the game. These same people warned friends not to purchase the game until more significant changes were introduced. One of the founders of hi-rez Erez as he goes by, later stated that the budget in the game was in the realm of 5 to 15 million per his AMA on Reddit, and that the revenue it generated was around 5 million, ultimately ending in a loss of profit. It's hard to know specifics, since he combines his claims with another later hi-rez game, Tribes Ascend. When Global Agenda launched, it was met with mixed reviews by critics, but the critics almost collectively all echoed statements that reinforced the funness of the gameplay and the potential the game had. Still, the critics also made it a point to point out that they saw a lack of content and picked apart the poor pricing model the game had. At launch, the game had a frankly puzzling pricing model. The base game was free. Co-op missions called Special Ops and mercenary play or public match style play, which is also known as pubs, were all free. But the conquest portion of the game, or AVA, also known as Alliance vs. Alliance, would then cost a subscription to play. The conundrum was that the developers during this stretch focused their changes primarily on the AVA portion of the game, which shoehorned people into paying a subscription. The problem was that many people did not think the game even deserved having a subscription, period. SANDSTORM was introduced in the summer of 2010, a new expansion that was slated to add a plethora of content to the game, content the game desperately needed. The game also had a free trial introduced around the same time, most awkwardly known for playing game ads using the Global Agenda voice services in the game. Yes, there was actually voice advertisements in the game thanks to the game's voice services. Now I know why people always seem to be against voice services in games. Well, that and the plethora of kids or abusers, I guess you could say. SANDSTORM was released in 2 phases. Phase 1 was launched on June 2nd, 2010. It consisted of a new system for acquiring weapons and armor through loot and tokens, 32 new weapons, mostly for the higher levels, new shops in the Dome City, new solo special ops PvE missions at different level difficulties, new Ultramax level 30 plus security special op PvE missions, that's a tongue twister, significant improvements to the special ops PvE, including adjusted UI and new NPCs, significant improvements to the special ops PvE, including the adjusted AI and new NPCs, revamped agency versus agency format, now with a single world map, 5 new PvP maps, improved social features including player inspections, new chat channels, and more, and finally, DirectX 10 support. Right after the launch of SANDSTORM's Phase 1, hi-rez was met with many controversies. Previously free content now was hidden behind a subscription paywall, also including newer content introduced in the patch. Level 30 plus content and solo PvE missions would now cost a subscription to play. This bred resentment for hi-rez, as they had advertised the game as subscription free, which was only partly true. Hi-rez discontinued the model ultimately, opting in the future to have paid expansions instead of hidden subscription fees. Hi-rez also removed subscriptions period, making the game buy to play. This also made SANDSTORM free to people who already owned the original game. The reason why this was significant was people were already playing the solo PvE missions, and then when the expansion came out, boom, it was behind a paywall, now you had to pay for it. Phase 2 of SANDSTORM launched on July 22nd, 2010. It added a new zone called Sonoran Desert, an open PvE zone designed mainly for lower level characters. They also introduced a city defense raid, only available for the level 30 plus in-game characters. Phase 2 also introduced tokens which could be exchanged for armor, the salvage skill which could salvage weapons armor that you didn't need, and consumables. In April 7th, 2011, Global Agenda launched the next expansion, Free Agent. The Free Agent update introduced the game to a free-to-play model, with optional Elite status, which would only require a single-time $19.99 purchase to activate. The free-to-play status let you play every feature of the game, minus the auction house and in-game mail. Elite status gave bonus XP, loot, and credits, as well as the ability to create agencies or guilds. They also didn't have to endure those pesky in-game voice ads. Seriously? In-game voice ads? Smite, a MOBA by hi-rez, was also announced the same month of April. This, unfortunately, was writing on the wall for Global Agenda, as Smite later would go on to outperform both Global Agenda and their later game, Tribes Ascend. Hi-rez said that the game going free-to-play made it more money than it ever had made previously. It also increased the player base by a reported 5 times. Later that same year in August, Global Agenda then launched its final expansion, which largely flew under the radar. This was likely due to the loss of interest in the game. The expansion was titled Recursive Colony, which was an expansion focused on adding more story content concerning the Recursive Colony.
A force once benign has turned against us, eliminating the human threat, feeding off our resources, endlessly replicating, robots building robots. It's their world now. The Recursive Colony has reached a singularity.
The The Recursive Colony expansion added a new open zone with several instance missions, quest chains, and mid to high level content, vendors, and social spaces. It also added daily repeatable quests, new high, max, and ultramax missions entering the spec op queues, new PvP acquisition and CTR map. Tutorials now included class-specific elements to help train new players. Why was this not in the game in the very beginning? And the ability to transfer between different open zone instances. Wow, for some reason when I hear open zone and then I hear open zone instances, it sounds really strange to hear those put together. Because the population numbers of the game are mostly unknown, it's hard to determine how many people were even playing the game at this point. Not to mention the instance nature of the game, which also made it feel more like a lobby game than an actual MMO, despite hi-rez's attempts to add more open zones. It's not coincidental during the year of 2012, there's little to no news or changes for Global Agenda. This is the same year that hi-rez launched Tribes Ascend, which was met with glowing praise, and then also later abandoned for Smite. It seems that Tribes Ascend's success ultimately marked the end for Global Agenda. The game, as of January 8th, 2017, is still technically running, but it can't be accessed on Steam and or the hi-rez main website. It seems the game is not just abandoned in the metaphorical sense, but also in the quite literal sense. Conclusion. So why did Global Agenda fail? What are the factors that led to its ultimate death? Let's break these possible factors down, but first, in my next section of the video, I will detail aspects Global Agenda got right. This will help everyone understand the legacy of the game and why its death is ultimately significant. So what did Global Agenda do right? Global Agenda was a hybrid MMO and a hybrid shooter. It was a mix of both. We hadn't quite seen something like it, and if you look at hi-rez's Paladins or Overwatch, you can't help but see certain similarities. Global Agenda had the progression and abilities of an MMO, with the shooting mechanics of a shooter. There was no tab targeting, it was free aim, it had 4 classes, Assault, Recon, Engineer, and Medic, which all had their own unique playstyles and tech trees. It didn't have crits, or things that reinforced randomness in the game, which obviously helped it have a more uniform gameplay. Global Agenda had AVA, or Alliance vs Alliance, which was a really neat idea of how to have conquest PvP in a game that wasn't really open world. Players competed over hexa tiles in an Alliance vs Alliance style game. Each tile was a max of 10 vs 10, where players competed over the tiles, which had different range of bonuses. Some housed facilities like labs, mines, and factories, which provided different benefits for your clans. These hexes initially were bidded on, with the winning bidder winning the hex tile. Then you had to defend said tile from possible attackers or thefts. Thefts were attempts by another alliance to undermine your hex, while attacks were full-on assaults to claim your tile. The winners of conquests were the alliance with the most tech. Although AVA was a great part of the game, it was not without its issues, as I will later discuss. Global Agenda's PvP was an obvious focus in the game, but not so much that the PvE was unfun or pointless. If you look at Warhammer, and its similarities to Global Agenda, they both focused on PvP, in different ways of course, but Warhammer had clear lacks in PvE content, while Global Agenda surprisingly had pretty good PvE. In fact, PvE missions in the game were both challenging and fun. They granted good experience and rewards, which meant that they were very often played. Not to mention, each PvE mission had a range of difficulty settings, although in most cases increases in difficulty merely increased the health and damage of the NPCs in them. Still, PvE missions were fun in their own way. So why did Global Agenda fail? In this section of the video, I will outline the largest contributing factors for the game's ultimate death. Rushed launch. Rushed launch is a rather typical contributing factor in a game's death, but Global Agenda was a perfect example of such. Initially, the game only had a tutorial and story content for the first 10 levels of the game. This lack of guidance and story persisted for 5 months after launch, and in case of the tutorial, wasn't even fleshed out until the game's last update in 2011. SANDSTORM brought a very much needed PvE story to help early characters who made it to level 8 and 10 and had already finished the story. But hi-rez then hid this behind a paywall, unbeknownst to the people playing the game. SANDSTORM was an even worse expansion than Jump to Lightspeed and Star Wars Galaxies in the sense of the cut content. It launched only a mere 5 months after the launch of the game. When the game was announced initially, it was supposed to have Dome City serve as the trading and social hub of the game, while ultimately having more open parts of the game for both PvE and PvP content. Instead, at launch, Dome City was the only open zone introduced to the game up until the SANDSTORM expansion. This was a bit misleading for some, as they expected to have more persistence in the world than a trade hub. This made the game feel little more than a lobby game with a social hub. You have to remember, this was advertised as an MMO after all. Had hi-rez held their launch for a few months, they might have avoided such a problem from occurring so early on. The subscription fiasco. I mentioned the way Global Agenda handled subscriptions earlier on, but let's really dive deep into why it was so bad. When the game initially launched, it had a playable beta that you had to pay in order to play. When you paid, you then owned a copy of the game. However, for some strange reason, hi-rez then added a subscription to the game, where in order to play the Conquest or AVA in the game, you needed to subscribe. This just felt very strange. Strange is probably the best way to put it. What other MMO did you know only wanted you to subscribe for very specific features, and still charge the box price? That seemed out of place for the game. But this got worse when the SANDSTORM expansion was launched. Although the game was supposed to be playable minus AVA without a subscription initially, when SANDSTORM launched, hi-rez put most of the content behind a paywall. To make matters worse, they took previously free content available without a subscription and also put that behind a paywall. Needless to say, this rubbed many people the wrong way, especially when hi-rez, attempting to defend themselves, said something along the lines of they needed to be compensated for new content, as was typical in MMOs. Except they were rather cryptic when it came to the subscription strategy, which is what ultimately angered people. Although hi-rez ended up making SANDSTORM a free expansion, they had already hurt the trust of a good portion of their fanbase, which created near irreparable damage. AVA implementation. AVA, or Alliance versus Alliance. If you remember, I listed it as a strength of the game. However, as I said previously, it wasn't a perfect feature, or really anything close to it. Alliance versus Alliance was a game mode focused on guild warfare. You fought over hex tiles in an attempt to get better tech so you could perform better and eventually win the season, which was roughly 2 weeks. This was the prime feature of the game, the feature that was supposed to be the game's strongest one. However, it was plagued with really a lack of imagination ultimately, and frankly, support. The game mode was incredibly easy to exploit, as you could have just about all the best players with the best characters pile into one mega alliance and then take over the entire map. Even if you managed to win a few tiles from them, they were able to amass such a lead that other guilds or alliances couldn't compete. When that alliance won the season, they got even stronger, and it was rinse and repeat. Not to mention, once the alliances got an early lead, they could use things like defensive facilities to shield surrounding hexes, meaning you had to go through the defensive hex in order to attack the adjacent hexes. They couldn't be spread thin. If you had to attack all of the hexes separately, then you could just force the alliance into having to field a bunch of 10-man armies. However, because of things like defensive facilities, they could just only need one to cover a certain amount of area. Since seasons ended so frequently, people were forced to go through the whole process again, but they weren't really rewarded for it. Once you won enough times and got the best gear, there wasn't really anything left for you to do. No real ranking system, and frankly no permanence except for the cosmetics. There's no problem with it being cyclical, coming and going, but if you don't reward people or provide a reason for people to continuously do it, it's eventually going to run its course. Especially when so many of the hexes shared so many similarities in look and layout. Why couldn't we see more variance in biomes? Sure, it's the future, but I'm sure someone created a few marine biomes or grass biomes. AVA was a feature that was fun for no longer than a month or two, and then it became essentially the same thing over and over again. Other games that have seasons are able to keep people playing because their seasons usually last longer than half a month. And they also provide more than just rewards at the end of the cycle. you get the enjoyment of progressing through a rank system, like in World of Warcraft's arenas, or in MOBAs and shooters rank systems where you have ELO and rank tiers. AVA didn't really have any of that, and was never really given more content in future expansions either. When the strongest feature of the game, the feature most advertised, is the most underdeveloped feature, it doesn't speak well for the life of the game. I mean, this feature is what the whole lore of the game was centered around, if you remembered in the very beginning. The final and frankly most damaging of the reasons is the abandoned development. Though other reasons for the failure of the game could be mentioned, I felt speaking on the abandoned development of the game would have been far more relevant than nitpicking small little things here and there. Sure, people will complain about things like gameplay, balancing, but Global Agenda was one of those games where you either loved the gameplay or you hated it. It was a hybrid of a game. As hi-rez would later state, Global Agenda systems and engines created more advanced systems and engines that were both used in the Tribes Ascend and Smite later games. Global Agenda, though, falls victim to greater ambitions of the company. After hi-rez was able to obtain the license to create a Tribes game, they went all in with their Tribes Ascend game. Tribes Ascend came out in 2012, the same year Global Agenda ceased to have further updates or developer interaction. Tribes Ascend was then, only 2 to 3 years later, also abandoned in favor of Smite, which according to one of the founders of the game was more profitable than both Global Agenda and Tribes Ascend combined. But it's not hard to be more profitable than those games when those games, although based on cool and fun ideas, weren't properly fleshed out. Smite was a MOBA, which means it already had a certain level of success from that, but it also was a third-person MOBA, so it had a very healthy niche. Global Agenda had positive results from its free-to-play switch, but even if it was free-to-play, people were still able to realize the flaws of the game eventually, flaws that weren't really fixed by hi-rez. Hi-rez's business strategy of late seems to be follow the market, no matter if they refuse to really innovate anything in it themselves. Smite followed the MOBA craze, and Paladins followed the Overwatch hype and success. Paladins downright seems like a copy in some cases, which is sad to see because that might mean that hi-rez's old ways of innovating might be gone. You can villainize them for their loss of creativity and vision, but hi-rez follows where the money goes, and it has proven to be a good business strategy for them. Still, their decision to abandon Global Agenda in 2012, months after a large update in August, the prior year, is ultimately what doomed the game. In total hi-rez fashion, the game is still technically running, just never really mentioned, not even on the official websites, not even on Steam. It's been nearly totally abandoned. So if people are wondering if the game is still up and running, it is, if you really want to call that running. More like hobbling around on 2 peg legs. The conclusion, hopefully after outlining some possible reasons as to why the game failed, you will have a better understanding of the game and why it ultimately died. Hi-rez lost me as a consumer after how this whole thing was handled, as I refuse to fund a game that will only be used to springboard the next new and improved game. Not to mention their blatant rip-offs of certain genres. Still, I have positive memories of my time in Global Agenda, and although they mentioned a Global Agenda 2 ages ago, it seems like my memories will be all I have left concerning the franchise. Well, in this video, of course, though this one comes with a very somber conclusion. Thanks for watching the video. If you liked it, feel free to leave a like. If you had thoughts or possibly agreed or disagreed with me, you can voice this in the comments section below. If you want to see more content like this or other video game focused analysis, subscribe to my channel. My social media links are in the description and on screen. I also linked our Discord channel, which is a free place to join and talk about video games with other passionate fans and gamers. My Patreon link is also in the description and on screen. Thanks for the support I have gotten recently. I nearly quadrupled in subscribers and views, and I am eternally grateful for you guys. I love doing videos like this, with the chance that I can tell a story someone might not have heard before, or perhaps remind someone of a story they possibly lived, but not with such a nostalgic approach to it. That's all I have for you guys. nerdSlayer out.